How do you create a truly, really kick ass product? We learned from the man who wrote the book. No, seriously, he's written many books about how to design and build products for success. From HP to Apple to Cisco to 75 other products in between. Dave Fradin is walking us through his framework for product success.
Tim Cook wrote a piece. He says, if we do follow our values and do all those things, the profits will follow. When I took a look at values for the first Fortune 500 companies, do they have values? Do they follow those values? Are they still in business? And only about 200 of those 500 companies are still around. They all had values and they all followed them. Those that did not have values went out of business. A company is given the privilege to make money by society, and therefore it's obligated to give back to society.
We have Dave Fradin here today, who's an expert product leader who cut his teeth at Apple and HP, working alongside legends like Steve Jobs. And today, he's on a mission to help the next generation build insanely great products with battle-tested frameworks and no fluff. So thanks again for joining us today on the Growth Department.
Glad to be with you.
Yeah, your career highlight reel is very snazzy, and I could spend a whole hour asking you questions just about that. You've written multiple books, throw multiple courses and workshops, helping massive companies like HP, Apple, Cisco figure out how to have success with their products. So today, I want to dive into your research and lay out your pretty crisp framework for product success. So what would you say are your 5 keys to product success, and how can you help us break down each one of those?
Sure. I boiled it down to the 5 keys when I was writing my book, Building Insanely Great Products, based upon my experience with 75 different products and services, software, hardware, and so forth over the past 50 plus years. And it boils down to the word spice, which is the name of my company, Spice Catalyst. So it acts as a mnemonic to help remind people and help people remember what the 5 keys are. The S stands for a strategy, a product market strategy, or product market plan. And I advocate putting together this 32-piece plan for your product or your service before you hand it to engineering to start development on the product. The P stands for a repeatable process. If you don't have repeatable processes in your company to develop and ship and market, and you manufacture your product, then you're doomed to failure. And one of my former clients, who was VP of product management, they had 5 product failures in a row, said that if you fail to have a repeatable process and climb up the maturity curve, you're bound to end up creating a culture of blame where everybody will blame everybody else. The I in SPICE stands for having the information necessary to make informed decisions about the product and the market. And the C stands for the customer, and that's the most important letter of the 5 keys. And that is understanding what your customer wants to do, why they want to do it, when they want to do it, where they want to do it, how they want to do it, what's standing in their way, how important is it to get that thing done, and then how satisfied are they with the current solution. And lastly, the E is to make sure that you have the training and development and the coaching and the mentoring within your organization to make sure you have the 130 skill sets or competencies required for product success. Companies that have failed to follow these 5 things, about 35% of all new products and services introduced each year fail in the marketplace, which represents a waste of about $1 trillion or more to humanity for products and services that never got a return on investment.
35% is quite a bit. I have 2 ways to break down SPICE with you. How do the 5 key factors differ for physical products, software products, and maybe a service product?
Doesn't differ at all. It's the same 5 keys.
Okay. So if
You need
you're
to have a strategy, you need to have a process, you need to have information, you need to understand what your customer wants to do, And some of the skill sets are both hard skills and soft skills. Some of the soft skills is to know how to negotiate, how to mediate, how to compromise, those kinds of things, how to communicate, how to be persuasive. So that applies to whether it's a hardware or software or or a service product. It applies to builders, roofers, real estate, banking, in addition to high tech.
Now let's talk size. So, would a small software company that has 10 people, did they still go through those 30 steps of strategy and then all of the spice with that small team? Is that possible?
Yes, it's possible, and it's essential if they want to stay in business. And I know a number of companies that were started by entrepreneurs did not follow the five keys to product success and failed. In fact, in India, they caught a bug around 2015 to get angel investors and venture capitalists to help fund startups, which they did. And 7,000 were funded. Today, almost all of them are out of business because they didn't know what they were doing in terms of the keys to product success. Since then, I've released a book that was published by Wiley. It's a little 798-page pamphlet called Successful Product Design and Management Toolkit. And it's being used at two preeminent universities, IIPM and the lovely universities. And well over 1,000 executives have gone through the 6 or 7 month course with my book as the primary source of information. So it took them learning the hard way that you can't have success. And the only way that you have success is by following the five keys to product success.
A lot of your work at Spice Look Catalyst seems like you're marrying product and marketing. The two are very connected. That's not the case at many companies. Sometimes it's an afterthought, or one tells the other what they need. How do you find the synergy to keep the two closely linked?
Well, typically I've learned, I get retained by a company and they say, help me find some customers. Then I find that they don't have a product market strategy. If you look at the first parts of the product market strategy in terms of understanding what your customer wants to do, understanding what the market is like, that's your market research, understanding what the competition is like, that's your competitive research, figuring out what your product's value proposition is, positioning your product in the marketplace. Now, the positioning helps you later with the messaging, which is used on the marketing side for the advertising, the PR, the social media, and so forth. The personas of who you're selling to, that's used by marketing to identify who it is that they're going to market to and where those people get their information. I remember when I took over as the group product manager for the Apple III, I went to talk to Jeff Raskin, Jef Raskin, who was one of the key architects of the Apple III. And he also was the architect for the Macintosh before Steve Jobs got involved. And nobody in the marketing department, which I was in at the personal computer systems division, could tell me what the persona was for and the market was for the Apple III. And I went to Jeff, who was the engineer, and I said, what did you have in mind when you were developing this product? And he said it was for the office and the business, and the office in the business, whether it's a small business or a major corporation. And nobody with all those MBAs from Stanford and MIT and Harvard that Apple had hired and paid 40% more than any other hire in the Bay Area at the time could tell me that. So it's very important to understand ahead of time who it is you're building this product or service for, so that when you do take it to market, you don't start trying to market to somebody who would have no interest in it.
Do you see products, if they do miss that step and they go to market, scramble or either change the product or change the persona?
Yeah, very much so. My cousin was a venture capitalist, investment banker. And in 1980, he was the top investment banker on Wall Street. And he had personally funded at that time to the tune of $1 million, which today would probably be about $20 million, a startup which wanted to do a computer workstation, which is a higher level of a PC, computer aided design software like Autodesk, word processing software like PageMaker, built upon a relational database so that if you change the design, the word processing drawing is automatically updated with revision control and management. And they were struggling. They couldn't find many customers. So I went to join them as VP of marketing and sales to try to help save my uncle's investment. So I went in, and the first thing I did is I went and I interviewed the 20 customers that they've been able to get over the previous 3 or 4 years, and found out that they found that the product would be best used by manufacturing engineers to create what's called manufacturing or assembly instructions, which they would then send down to the shop floor and show the people on the floor how to build the product. And one of our customers was Lit and Applied Technologies, which make fuzz busters for fighter aircraft. So if someone shoots at them with a missile, it will detect the missile coming in and tell the pilot to either turn left, turn right, climb, dive, or eject, or whatever it may be. So I then convinced the founders of this company to focus on the manufacturing documentation market, which is a very thin, narrow market where we could have all of our resources focused, relatively little competition in that area, and the customer really has a very difficult project to get done. Because in the case of Applied Technologies, if the Russians would change the radar on their missiles, Litton had to change the hardware on their fuzzbusters as fast as possible. Otherwise, more pilots will lose their lives.
That's pretty cool. So their system could click once and it would go out to everything.
Yep.
I like it. In a speech that you gave at the Productize conference, which is pretty cool, that's been going on since the 30s.
Yeah. I'm not sure how long it's been going on, but certainly not since the 30s, because product management didn't come around until 1938.
Okay. Something in the video said since the 30s. And I was like, oh,
Well,
I thought the conference was continually from then.
though I was talking about how product management, the field, which by the way, I prefer to call product success management because that explains what it is you do, started in 1932 at Procter and Gamble, and they called it brand management. And one of the guys there wrote a memo saying that we ought to give the authority to the brand manager for the product and let them be sort of the little CEO of the product, which they did. And then Dave Packard was later influenced, along with Bill Hewlett, when they started Hewlett Packard, by that notion of a brand manager. And then they invented the technical product manager, which they call the product manager, in 1938 when HP got started.
Do you think this chief product success manager role that you talked about has caught on yet?
I think so. I back in 2018, I was in Bangalore, India, at Manipal University, of which I'm a distinguished professor at, which my daughter doesn't care. She still won't give me any respect. They took me out to speak to Philips and Dell and Samsung. So I gave a talk on product success at Samsung. About 150 of their engineers and product managers were in the room. And I told them that really you should change your title to product success manager. And the reason being is I have found through the years, if I go to a cocktail party and there's a nice looking woman there and I start talking to her, occasionally they ask me, what do I do? And I say, I'm a product manager. They say, what's that? I said, well, try to figure out the market, the product market strategy, the personas, the value proposition, the product positioning. And then from that, I can do a pricing strategy, identify the features, advantages, and benefits that I could pass on to engineering, do a pricing strategy, a distribution strategy, a end of life strategy, a support strategy, a manufacturing strategy. Then I give it to engineering, and then I track them to make sure that they actually build the product according to all of the parameters I just laid out. Well, after about a quarter of that, she usually turns and walks away. So here's a memo you could use to get your title changed, because she didn't understand what a product manager does. And then you could send a note to your boss and say that if you can become a product success manager, he or she could be the chief product success manager. And besides, if you allow me to change my title, I'll get married, have the requisite 2.3 kids, and I promise to invite you to the wedding. So after that speech, the VP of product management at Samsung, which is responsible for the Android operating system on all Samsung phones, came up to me and he said he had 5 of his product managers come up to him and ask if they could change their title. And he said, you can't, because that's dictated by Samsung in South Korea. I said, well, if you let them print up business cards that say product success manager that they would only use at parties, I don't think Samsung corporate would ever know about it. So my campaign is beginning to catch on.
Okay, good. I'll keep my ears peeled,
Right.
perked, my eyes peeled, my ears perked up. Have you ever run into problems with product success leaders? I'm trying not to say product managers, having difficulty getting things moved across the finish line or advanced because they have the responsibility but not the authority.
If they don't know how to negotiate and if they don't know how to mediate differences, then they'll have a great deal of difficulty moving the product forward. And sometimes you have to do unusual things. For example, when I was at Apple and they asked me to take over as the business unit manager for the Apple III product line, after I told them that I had no authority but all this responsibility for this product line, which was the CPU plus about 500 other associated hardware and software products, they said, okay, we'll give you the authority and an independent business unit will make you the business unit manager or bum. I said, I can't be a manager. They say, no, you're a bum. So Steve Jobs was on a campaign to kill the Apple III and the Apple II, even though he hadn't shipped his Macintosh yet, because he had this notion back then that his competitor was the Apple III and the Apple II to the Macintosh. And he had to get them out of the marketplace to open up room for his beloved Mac. He says after he had the failure that he had at Lisa, at Mac, at Next, which was his next computer company, which I called Blast, and almost lost Pixar, I found in my research that he went to work, get mentoring from Dave Packard, who I knew very well because when I joined HP, I was in the corporate PR department. And one of my responsibilities was to handle Dave's personal PR as the chairman of the board of Hewlett Packard. And Packard convinced him that he need not be afraid of cannibalizing his own products because if he doesn't do it, if the company doesn't do it, then someone else will. But he didn't know that back in the fall of 1983. And he demanded that we rescind the introduction of the Apple III Plus, which I had just introduced at Comdex, the big computer retailing show in Las Vegas the week before. They ordered me to come back from Southern California, where I was traveling around talking to dealers, encouraging them to sell Apple IIIs. And before I could get back there, I got a email through Apple Mail from Gene Carter, who then was a VP of sales for Apple. And he asked me, can't you please cancel the introduction of the Apple III Plus? And so I wrote back to him and I said, I'm sorry, I can't because the Apple Mail email system doesn't have the capability or the function to cancel a scheduled email that was going to go out in a couple of days. And I knew that he did not use his computer to write emails because he didn't know how to type. So I'm pretty sure that he would dictate things to his secretary. And when he'd get an email, his secretary would print it off and hand it to him on a piece of paper, sort of like what Donald Trump does today. So a few years ago, we had a reunion of the first Apple employees, and Gene was there. And I went up to him and said, Father, I need to ask for your forgiveness. He says, okay, what did you do now? And I told him that story. And I said, I lied to you about not being able to recall the email. And the reason he knew that I lied to him is I had the responsibility for this product line, which I took over because the company was facing a $20 to $30 million loss. And I turned that around to about a $600 million profit. And one of the key things I did as someone with little authority at that point in time was to make something up in order to accomplish the goals of the company, the shareholders, management, and all of our dealers and our distribution network and our employees. And then Gene put his hand on my shoulder and he says, I forgive you, my son.
It's great. So that's a story of no authority turned into, the bum. Did you
Right.
ever have bum athletic sweatshirts?
No, that's a good idea. I think I should do that.
There was a big brand in Boston. I don't know if it made it throughout out the country, but it was bum athletic and it just said big letters bum on it. So when you're telling that story, I was like, gotta get you one of those.
Maybe I could bundle it with Trump cologne.
Now we're talking. The scent and the look. It's going to be great. So you mentioned earlier that it's about 130 skill sets that are needed to bring a product successfully to market.
Right.
How would a small team, hobble that together?
Well, the first thing they should do is themselves or hire someone like my company to help them assess the skill sets that each of their employees have, both in terms of basic, intermediate, and advanced, and then put together a training program customized for each of those employees to enable them to acquire the additional competencies or skill sets necessary to fill out that matrix of 130 key skill sets. And then redo that assessment a year later, adjust the training, the mentoring, the coaching, and continue doing that as you build up your expertise. This is what the military does. During Operation Desert Storm, we didn't just go right over there and invade Iraq and Kuwait. Our soldiers went over to Kuwait and Saudi Arabia and trained for 6 months before they finally attacked. So the military, in fact, I just read today that the Ukrainian army is putting a division of trainers into every corps throughout the Ukrainian army so that the training is as close to the front lines as possible. Make sure that the soldiers there get the training they need, not only to defeat the invading Russians, but also for their own survival. But a lot of companies don't do that. And that's part of the reason that they have product failures. That's part of the reason why the $1 trillion a year is wasted in new product development.
Okay, so you don't have to go out and hire 130 or even 50 people. If you have a 10-person team, you can skill them up and then slot in new people, or even for a lot of conversations I have on this channel are about fractional leaders coming in or folks like yourself supplementing your core team. What's the best way? This is flipping topics now. What's the best way to get to that C in Spice and get customer experience and feedback to make your product even more successful?
We start out first as what I would call a social anthropologist, and you just observe what people are doing. For example, I was born and raised in Detroit, and the story goes that Henry Ford would go out on the streets of Dearborn, not far from where I went to junior high school, and he would ask people, would you like to have a car? And they looked at him like they had no idea what this guy was talking about. And he would explain what a car is. It's got four wheels and has a internal combustion engine, and you can go maybe 7 or 8 miles an hour, depending on how fast someone can walk in front of you with a lantern for safety purposes. And their eyes would glaze over and they would say, no, I just need a faster horse. So that's part of the reason why I think the first car was not called a car or an automobile. It was called a horseless carriage.
Hmm.
And if Henry was smart enough, he would have sat out on the stump of one of the many bars in downtown Dearborn with a mug of beer in his hands and noticed people were beating their horse with a stick to get through town faster. So yeah, if he developed something that was faster than a horse, like a horseless carriage, he might have something that could be successful. So that illustrates the issue is you can't ask people what they need or what they want because they can't tell you. That requires them to be as wise as Leonardo da Vinci to first understand what it is that the problem is that they have, and then to articulate the solution. And then they can say, I want a car because my need is, and the thing I want to do is to go through town faster or get my goods to market faster. So what you first do is observe, then you go out and interview 40 to 80 people, and then you get a data set that's representative sample of the personas that you're targeting, and you survey 800 to 1,200 of them to get the data that you need in order to make informed decisions. If you're lucky enough to have big data, you could then take some artificial intelligence, which could look at a lot of big data sets and come back at what the big data is telling you in terms of what people want to do. So it's a 4-step process: observe, interview, survey, analyze.
And this would be before you launch the product, ideally. The company you talked about earlier, your uncle's investment or cousin's investment, they skipped that part of it, went to
Yeah.
market, and then said, whoopsies, if we don't want this to fail, crash and burn, we need to go back and now start paying attention to the customers who are using it. Would it be the 4 same steps, or what would you do if you've brought something to market? It's kind of not hitting the numbers, and you think maybe it's not the right people or the customers aren't finding it valuable.
Well, they were both engineers, the husband-wife team that started it, and they didn't know how to do that. And they've had no marketing or sales experience. So when I came on board, the observing part was already kind of done because they had 20 customers out there. And amongst those 20 customers, we'd get a better feel for what it is that they want to do. And that has identified the area of manufacturing documentation. Later in my career, in the early 90s, I was hired by a company called Digital FX, which had built a high end digital effects system for movies and television networks. And then they had built what was called a video effects, which was a little digital to analog box with a switcher, character generator, machine control that you plug into a Macintosh and plug into analog tape decks, and you could edit video on your Macintosh. And the product was not selling very well. So I went out and talked to the customers that had bought the product, and I found that they were people that knew video. They had graduated from college with a degree in film or in video production. And they were using this to significantly reduce the cost of what's called a post production suite. I forget the exact numbers, but with a traditional switcher and machine control devices, plus your decks, you're spending like $150,000. And the video effects would drop it to, I don't know, something like $60,000 or $70,000. So the return on investment improved considerably. And these were video experts. Well, the bright people that started digital effects thought it was going to be used by Macintosh users to edit video, and they knew nothing about editing video. And the video people knew nothing about how to use a Macintosh. So by going out and interviewing and finding out the personas of who is actually buying the product, if you're in the marketplace at that time, that enables you to focus the product on that particular marketplace.
Do you know, looking at a product, this is, as O'Leary would say, take it behind the shed and shoot it, or this just needs a little bit of love and some better strategy? Are there any red flags you look for whether you need to kill something?
Well, you go through the SPICE 5 steps. Do you have a strategy for the product? Or is a strategy that includes understanding the market you're going to be going into, your target market, the total available market. And if you found out that the total available market is very, very small and they're not inclined to buy it because the product won't give them a return on investment, and you calculate the potential return on investment for the customer. If that's not there, then yeah, you either need to enhance the product or shoot the product.
If you were an early stage going in and giving advice to an early stage founder, what would be the top nugget from your spice that they need to put on a sticky note and keep in front of their computer?
Understand the customer.
That C is very, very important.
And there's one other thing that's more important than all of that first, and that is make sure that you have a set of values for your company and that you follow those values and you have everybody in the company understand what the values are and what they mean. And it's because of the HP way, which was the value statement of HP and Apple values that Apple had, which meant that when everyone would go into a room to make a joint decision, they are all coming from the same values foundation in order to make their decision.
Did those set of values that everybody understands, does that help minimize the likelihood of the finger pointing and the infighting? Okay, so if you're not fighting with each other, you're just working together to build great products.
Exactly. For example, the Apple values are such things as empathy for the customer's achievement, positive social contribution, individual performance, team spirit, innovation, individual growth, quality, excellence, and good management. Notice it doesn't say anything about profit. And in fact, Tim Cook wrote a piece, I don't know, about 5, 6 years ago. He says, if we do follow our values and do all those things, the profits will follow. But there are others around that read Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged, which says the only thing a company needs to do is make profits. And that's led Mitt Romney to say that companies are people too. Enabled the Supreme Court to do the Citizens United decision, which allows rich people and rich companies to spend all they want on political campaigns. And it's kind of funny because I was visiting with Bill Magruder, who was a special consultant to President Nixon on technology at the White House back around 1972 or 73. And Bill had been the head of the supersonic transport program before the Congress shut that down. And he moved over to advise Nixon on technology. And I remember vividly sitting at his old executive office building on the basement floor where his office was. And he said to me, "What do you think of Ayn Rand and Atlas Shrugged?" I said, "I had never heard of anything about it before." He says, "Well, everybody here in the White House is reading it." And that notion of profits above society, which is contrary to what I learned when I joined HP. Dave Packard wrote extensively that a company is given the privilege to make money by society, and therefore it's obligated to give back to society. So if one person walks into the room with the Atlas Shrugged set of values, and another person walks into the room with the Dave Packard, HP Way, or Apple values, there's going to be conflict, and they're not going to get along.
In Good to Great, that book, that research shows too, the companies that take care of their customers and their people and the planet end up doing better in the long run.
Yeah, Tom Peters came to speak at Apple University when I was taking courses at Apple University when I first joined Apple. And I had just taken over the Apple III product line. And that notion of just optimizing customer satisfaction that Tom found when he interviewed like 500 corporate executives at successful and unsuccessful companies. And I asked him about this dilemma that we had for the Apple III, where the internal people at Apple, particularly the marketing people, could not understand what the market was for the product. And they were constantly fighting against each other, which was embellished in Steve Jobs' attempt to cancel the product line. And I asked him, what should we do? And he paced back and forth for about 3 minutes. And he turned to me, he says, "I don't know." So I followed what he said in his book and went out and started talking to Apple III customers and dealers and found out that they loved their Apple III. It's almost as if the keyboard exuded cocaine. That they got addicted to it because it had a full size regular keyboard, just like a typewriter would have, like a selectric typewriter would have. And it just felt good using the computer. So that's when I came up with the notion of setting up a bulletin board system, which was a precursor to the internet, and it enabled with modems, dial-up modems at the time, for an Apple customer to dial in to the Apple III bulletin board system and get information about the Apple III, technical support, help files, suggestions, articles, and that kind of thing. And the guy that I hired to run it was a fellow by the name of Albert Chu, who later went on to be head of VP software for Apple. And the guy that I got to write the code, I forget his name off the top of my head, was an independent IT contractor. And I had the ability at the push of a button to communicate with half of all the Apple III owners worldwide, 25,000 of them at that particular time. And that enabled us to be brought closer together. And that enabled and enhanced sales because if they felt they were being supported on this Apple III, they'll buy another one or they'll recommend it to their friends and acquaintances, and sales would be able to go up as a result of that level of support, which we see from Apple today. We're beginning to see that from other companies. So that ability to communicate directly with your customer is part of the keys to understanding the customer and product success.
It's a great pivot into understanding the customer today because so much has changed even since, I don't know, January, especially this year.
I'd like to add to that. One of the funny things that happened when I was researching my book, Building a Sailing Great Products, I got a hold of the guy that wrote the code for the Apple III bulletin board system. And we're having lunch here in Los Gatos. And I turned to him and I said, when AOL came out, America Online, and I saw that user interface, I said, my gosh, that looks exactly like the user interface we had on the Apple III bulletin board system. And the guy puts his head down and looks into his lap and he shakes his head. He says, yeah, it was the same code. So he took the code that he and I had developed. I handled the front end user interface design, and he handled the back end. He took that same code, and that was how Ed Case, I think his name was, that started America Online. And that's why AOL was really successful in the beginning because it was so easy to use. Unfortunately, I still haven't gotten my royalties.
I just logged into AOL this week. It had been a while. It had been a while. I had 1,000 emails or something. So with customers being at the center of this and very important for a successful product launch and a successful growth of a product, how do you recommend leaders pay attention to customer behavior in with changes like AI, where they search for things, how they buy things, how they want to interact with support? How does a product keep up with all of those changes?
Well, they should set up what we call listening posts at different places where they're listening to see how the customers' preferences are moving and changing over time. And in fact, one of the thoughts that I had is back in 2015 is to put together an open source doapedia, like a Wikipedia for understanding what it is that people and companies do. And if we just list all these things out, then if you want to develop a new product or service, you look at one of those things that people or companies want to do, and you evaluate who's doing it and how satisfied people are in using that particular product or service. Then it occurred to me, maybe if I asked AI what it is that people do. So I went to the AI tool I use called Perplexity, and I typed in, what is it that people do? And it came back and it categorized everything people do in like 8 different categories and started listing things out. Then the hit me says, maybe I should ask it, which of these things can AI do? And in a few seconds, it comes back with it says, AI can do this, AI can do that, AI cannot do this, AI cannot do that, and so forth. So I put my whole Duopedia together in about 5 minutes. So product managers, product success managers need to monitor that. In fact, you could probably do a query of AI is how has customers' buying preferences in grocery stores changed over the last year? And it'll come back and tell you.
You just triggered something with me for how quickly products are being made. People can make, oh, I made 3 apps today. They're not doing spice. They're just making it and sending it out. Is the number of the trillions wasted, is that going to go up?
Probably, but the advantage of being able to develop a new, say, software quickly using AI is you are looking at yourself in terms of what the issue that you have is, what it is that you want to do. I give an example of Uber, the ride sharing business. When, what was his name? Travis, I think, came up with the idea. He was living and working in Los Angeles. And I don't know if you've ever been to LA and tried to call a cab. You do. You wait on the corner, the cab never shows up. You call them again, and it still doesn't show up. You call them again, they say, oh, it's just 10 minutes away. And eventually you get your cab, and you get to your meeting across town about an hour late. So he had a real problem getting someone with a car to pick him up and take him to wherever he wanted to go. So that's where the notion with the advent of the smartphone and the ability to request through a software program over your smartphone and monitor where the car is that's coming to pick you up. It got invented. Hence Uber, Lyft, and other of these ride sharing services came out of. On the other hand, if you grew up and was trying to work in Washington, D.C. or New York, if you sneeze and hold your hand up to your nose, it simulates the way you hail a cab in New York or Washington, and you would get 10 cars, 10 taxis lined up to pick you up. So it's not a problem in New York. It's not, or then it was not a problem in Washington, D.C. So if someone has an idea for a particular software program or application, and there are others like that person with that same problem, the likelihood of having some level of success is pretty good. But you need to go on and say, okay, who is it that I'm building this for? How many of them are there? How do I reach them? What price do I need to price it at so that they will just buy it rather than mulling over whether or not to buy it? What kind of support and service do I need to provide, and so forth? And those are all elements of that product market strategy.
So you can still move quickly, but take a pause and do a little bit of spice.
Exactly.
We don't want you to not go build cool shit. Build it, but still spice.
Especially, it's just like when you're cooking. If too much spice ruins the meal, just enough right amount of spice assures success.
Have you ever had Tony Chachi's? The
I've,
Louisiana spice? Oh,
yeah,
it's like a Creole. My parents lived in Baton Rouge for a while, so they'd give it to us every Christmas. It's like I can't go through this huge bottle in a year. You put too much in, and the whole dish is gone. Done.
exactly.
But just enough. Excellent fries. All right, I'm going to hit you with some rapid fire questions, and then ask you to do a wrap up for everybody. One takeaway. So just let it flow. Go. Favorite product you've ever worked on?
Probably the Apple III.
favorite book you've written?
Building and sailing great products. And then perhaps my latest one called Letters from My Jaime. My dad's name was Hyman, and he sometimes went by the nickname Jaime. And a cousin of mine somehow got the letters that he wrote home when he served in the armed forces during World War II. And they're very, very funny. And so I put some history around the dates of each of those letters, going back even to include an 18-page autobiography of my grandfather that became the blacksmith to the governor of Kiev. And before the next pogrom was to occur, the governor gave him a few $100s and said, get out of the country. So he left and immigrated to New York, Baltimore, and Washington, D.C. And then as I researched the Fradin name more, I found that there was Fradins throughout France. And
Huh.
there's an actual French book called the Book of Fradin, and my ancestors there date back to such things as a winery, the mayor of Lyons, a general in Napoleon's army. And one of them got appointed by, I think it was King Philip VI as a duke. So, following traditional French aristocracy, I am therefore a duke.
Oh,
And I ignore the French Revolution. They got rid of that. So when I call up my daughter, this is a few years after I asked her, now that I'm a distinguished professor, can I get some respect? And she said, no. I said, hey, I just found out I'm a duke. Can I get some respect? And she says, no. And then I traced that back and I found out that my grandmother 26 generations or so ago, was forced during the Inquisition in Spain, out of Spain in 1492, and traveled north and was saved. Her party was saved from some marauding thieves by Guatemala Fradin, and hence beginning of the Fradin dynasty.
how do you find this? That is so long ago. Where did you find all of this information? That's
Well,
amazing.
when I started researching the Fradin history, it was kind of interesting. I organized the first Soviet Union America youth exchange, where my organization, Federation of Americans Supporting Science and Technology, sent 5 students to the Soviet Union. They sent 5 students to the United States. So we took them around the countries. This is a cultural exchange. Didn't have to play ping pong. And part of that, so at the beginning of that, the Soviet science fair came to Washington, D.C., where I was living and working. And they invited me to the escorts, invited me to the chaperones, invited me to the Watergate Hotel for some vodka. So I sat there with these guys, and they have vodka in these little test tubes stuck in a mound of ice, and you just shoot the thing. And after maybe 30 or 40 of those, they convinced me to take them on a personal tour of the White House, the U.S. Capitol, and the National Zoo. I have no idea how the National Zoo got in there. About halfway through our drinking, they said, what's your name?" And I said, "Fradin." They said, "Jewish." And I suspect they were from the KGB. And there were hundreds of Fradins around Chernobyl. So I think some of my ancestors there, as a result of the nuclear accident, probably glow in the dark. So in doing my research back, it turned out there was a Fradin group on Facebook, which has about 400 Fradins there, and one of them mentioned this book of Fradin, and I was able to get a copy of it and use Google Translate to translate it from French because I got a D in French into English. And I got a D in English also, and was able to read it. And hence, I found out those stories that I am now a Duke. So if you're interested in that book, you can go to my website, spicecatalyst.com, or my personal website, davidfradin.com. Find links to the Amazon book. If that's too much work, you can just search on Amazon for Duke David Fradin, and that book will pop up. Or David Fradin and my other books, Building and Sailing Great Products, Organizing and Managing and Sailing Great Products, and then my little 798-page pamphlet that widely published, a Successful Product Design and Management Toolkit.
That's the beach read everyone's reaching for this year.
Until I finished my final book, which is called Trippin', Life's Little Laughs, an unauthorized autobiography.
Excellent. Well, I have one last question before the sign off. Fill in the rest of this sentence. Growth happens when.
I think when people do the right thing for other people and values are followed and enforced, and if we take care of others, they'll take care of us.
I like this message throughout the whole episode. You know, be good, be a good person, and things are going to work out. And if they don't, you at least have friends, not a lot of enemies. What would you leave to somebody who's starting a business or about to launch a product as the one takeaway from this episode?
Make sure that you have a set of values and follow those values. And then, in terms of people considering joining those companies, after they are interviewed and asked all their questions, they ask the potential hiring manager, what's the company's values? What are their values? And if it's a match, great, join it. If it's not a match, run out of there as fast as you possibly can. And when I took a look at values, for the book Building and Sailing Great Products, I went back and looked at the values of the first Fortune 500 companies. And I was personally knowledgeable about many of them because many of them contributed to my Federation of Americans Supporting Science and Technology, a nonprofit nationwide student organization. And I made a list with made a list of them with 3 columns. Do they have values? Do they follow those values? Are they still in business? And only about 200 of those 500 companies are still around. They all had values and they all followed them. Those
Wow.
that did not have values went out of business. So then I thought maybe, and this is the thought for your listeners, is maybe this will have some application to my personal career. So I made a list of the 25 organizations that I've been associated with, from starting the Flying Club at the University of Michigan to the FAST organization to the Environmental Balance Association of Minnesota to running the Governor Alqui's gubernatorial campaign where we won, to running John Connolly's presidential campaign in Minnesota, which we lost badly, to Hewlett Packard, to Apple, and a number of other companies, and being a homeowners association president, board member. And I made a list. Did they have values? Did they follow the values? Did it map into my values? And without exceptions, if that was true, I thrived. I was very, very happy. If it was not true, and I couldn't see that back then, they either fired me or I quit. And I felt better. It was like a mercy killing. I felt better the next day. So I told that story to a friend of mine that managed my vacation rental on the ocean in Maui. And he came back to the Bay Area, was looking for a job. Next day, I went out for an interview. He asked about their values. He and the hiring manager talked for 4 hours about values, and they hired him. And he said he's never been happier in his life.
That spreadsheet is an amazing practical way to do what I've been trying to do in my head. When I'm looking at, hey, will I work with this company? Maybe I shouldn't. That's simple and genius. I'm going to use that.
Great. No royalties necessary.
Well, if AOL doesn't have to, then I'm definitely not. So you've earned a lot of titles. You've got the bum, you've got the Duke, you've got the honorary degree. I hope after this episode comes out, we'll come up with a good title for this, that your daughter is finally giving you the respect you deserve, because you got to get that respect, right?
Yeah, I'll pay $1 for that.
Okay, you got it. All right. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll talk to you again soon.